If it's wrong to intentionally kill human beings, innocent human beings, and abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings, then abortion is morally wrong. That's the simple logic of it.
So a few days ago, the news broke that the Supreme Court, it looks like, is going to overturn the decision made almost 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade, and also the case in the 90s, the Casey case on abortion. And so we've been wanting to cover this topic of abortion on the Maven Parent Podcast, and we thought...
I haven't. I don't like controversy.
Well, it's not like we want to. Like, this is a fun...
No, we fun
topic.
We wanted.
But we have wanted to, because abortion is a topic that we all need to talk to about with our kids. And of course, depending on the age, it depends on how in depth you go into this topic. But we talk a lot on the podcast about having conversations, narrating as we live life with our kids. And, you know, oftentimes we'll get questions about, like, how do you start conversations with your kids? And this is an easy one now. Not an easy topic to talk about, but an easy opportunity to ease into a conversation about human beings, our value, life, and something that our culture really values, which is abortion, and how to help our kids to think through it. So, first off, we want to say tonight or the next night or whenever you're listening to this, bring up a news story and you can read part of it to your kids, tell them what's going on, and then that can launch you into one, hopefully, of many conversations to have with your kids about this topic.
Yeah, this is actually a kind of an explosive story like this can be a blessing for us as parents, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about really important things. And I think sometimes we talk about this conversation as a difficult conversation. There's a part of me that wants to push back on that and say it's, in some senses, it's not a difficult conversation. And that's what we're going to talk about, just kind of the logic of this issue morally. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's difficult. I think maybe where some of the difficulty comes is it can be a controversial issue. And the reason why I'm thinking about this, and even maybe not even wanting to characterize it as a difficult conversation, is because then that, I think sometimes we get that in our mind, and then we will kind of avoid the conversation because it's one of those difficult conversations and it's controversial and it makes people uncomfortable. And so let's stay away from it. And so however you're feeling about it, I think as we talk through it, hopefully we're going to be able to help simplify it a little bit and see it's not, the moral part of this conversation is not complex. And any parent, whether you have training in this issue or not, can be well equipped to have conversations with your kids about this and not to avoid it. And even if at the end of the day we say, hey, this is controversial and this is challenging, well, then we still need to have the conversation because the issue we're dealing with is, I think, the social justice issue of our time. And I use my words carefully there. I think the whole language of social justice has been co-opted. And when you really think about what justice is and the idea of kind of rights that we have, we lump so much under that category of social justice that doesn't actually fit within, I think, a tight definition of social justice. But this is an area of justice because you have this issue that has to do with someone's rights, particularly the unborn, and whether or not their fundamental their fundamental right to life is being violated. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to push back a little bit before we go into the argument.
Bring it. Let's get controversial.
And how to talk about it with our kids. So I think the reason it's difficult at least when I think of, and it might be just our differences as men and women, like, women tend towards empathy more. So it might be that. I mean, whenever I think about this issue, read about this issue, people come to my mind who have been affected by this.
Yeah.
So I know many women that have had abortions and families that have been affected by this. So I guess that's what I mean by, but you're right though, it shouldn't stop us from talking about it or worrying, like our worry about if someone in our family has had an abortion, even if as parents, if that's part of your story, that shouldn't stop us from talking about it, because as you say, the moral arguments against it are so solid. So it's that, and that's the approach we're going to talk about with taking with our kids, talking to them about the moral and logical arguments to help them think through it that are important, and the biblical arguments. What, do you want to say something?
I do. Well, no, so I think what you've done is you have misapplied.
Oh
no,
my gosh.
I'm just kidding. What you've done though is you've created a distinction. Mm-hmm. That's where, to help our kids navigate this stuff, and for us to navigate this stuff, these kind of distinctions are good, because what I had said was that the when it comes to the moral logic, that's where it's more simple.
Right.
And now you're bringing in a different arena. You're bringing in the interpersonal relationships, men and women who have been through this. And there, I think we could say, yeah, that is a more difficult issue, because there are people who have had abortions, Christians who have had abortions. This is an issue that touches people's lives, and that's where it does get messy and difficult, because as we talk about the moral issue, yeah, it's going to bleed into these other areas, and there will be some difficulty there.
Yeah.
So it's, but making the distinctions is good, because I think first we want to get clear on the moral logic of it. We want to get clear on the moral position, right? So that we can, so that will give us confidence.
So we want to step out of the emotion of the people or whatever, because that sometimes can twist how we're seeing things or whatever, right?
Yeah. So, are there objective moral truths? Are there moral truths that are true whether anyone believes them or not?
Yeah.
Is murdering innocent people a moral wrong, a moral evil, no matter what I think about it? And
and that's where it can be difficult. So back to what I was saying, I think I feel like this is a difficult topic to tackle with kids because of the culture and the emotional, personal side to it. But what you were saying about, basically having courage still and not letting that stop us from in our homes with our kids talking about these topics that, in the culture, if you say these things, you're going to be shouted down, or, you probably wouldn't have an open conversation in your lunchroom at work, maybe about this, but that in your home with your children, you cannot let that stop you from having open, candid conversations about it.
Yeah, and this is where Jesus models for us engagement with the world. I mean, Jesus comes in both truth and grace. This is what we see in John chapter 1, verse 14, right? The word becomes flesh and dwells among us. And Jesus brings both love and grace and mercy and truth at the same time. They're two sides of the same coin, right? And so we don't want to sacrifice one or the other. And in fact, it's not loving to sacrifice or hold back with the truth. And at the same time, we can beat people over the head with the truth in a way that doesn't communicate any of the grace. And the whole truth is that no matter what experience you've had, if you are someone who's had an abortion, well, guess what? biblical truth speaks to that as well. And we can at the same time affirm that is a grave moral evil. And at the same time, say the Lord can forgive all sin and he can redeem all things. And so we hold those truths together. So, gosh. All right. So now it's a difficult issue. You've just demolished
I brought you down. So
no, it's so I think thinking through, maybe making these distinctions. Hey, okay, there's the moral logic we're going to talk about. There's some of that interpersonal stuff. Then there's law, the issue of law. And the reason we're talking about this is because the Supreme Court has listened to the arguments on the Roe v. Wade case, which was it 1973, so almost 49 years ago. So this is something that's been going on for 49 years. And when we look at kind of abortion numbers, we're talking about probably over 60 million abortions. 60 million. So there's a gravity here to this issue. Now, there's a separate issue of this opinion, the rough draft of this opinion being leaked. Probably, it looks like maybe it could be a law clerk or something. I think it was Chief Justice
John Roberts.
Yes, but with Chief Justice. Yes, Chief Justice John Roberts. That's what I was trying to get at. I think he just confirmed that this was an authentic rough draft. I mean, this is not some forgery or anything. And basically, it let us know that the looks like the Supreme Court justices are going to overrule Roe v. Wade. Now, what that means is, in part, their argument is basically, hey, there's no right in the Constitution to abortion. All right, and so they're going to overrule it. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to send this issue back down to the states. So it doesn't actually ban abortion. But the good thing about this is that it's going to remove federal funding for abortion. So anyway, that leak is what's leading to this conversation. And if hopefully people are aware of what's going on. And so,
yeah, and even if you weren't, again, you can, to start conversations with your kids, you don't always have to be read way ahead of things. You can just say, okay, let's pull up this news article about it, read it, and then start the conversation.
Yeah. So the U.S. we do have some of the more radical abortion laws, it seems. Now, I haven't fully confirmed this, but I've seen this from a number of sources, that the U.S. is one of only 7 countries that allows elective abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy. So we are, our company, in terms of countries, is North Korea, China, Vietnam, Canada, Singapore, and the Netherlands. So we have some of the most radical abortion laws, outpacing kind of Europe on this one. So this is an issue. Now, where do you start?
Especially with our kids, where do we start? If we bring up this news story to the kids and then they say, well, maybe we should. Well, no, I guess we'll start with how would we start the conversation? Because I'm thinking about ages, and how we have navigated this. Because we have navigated this. We've talked about abortion with all 5 of our kids at all different stages and very young too. I mean, abortion is something that you've been teaching about in our youth groups when we were first married and you were a youth pastor, and then in all of your speaking and teaching days, abortion has been a topic. So our kids have been in the audience when you're talking to youth groups about it. So for us,
just as a point of fact, it's one of the least requested talks that I have on my list. I mean, it is by far that talk. I think I've done just a handful of times over the last 18 years. Because I think too many Christians want to avoid controversy.
Yeah. Because I think we want to avoid it because of what I was saying earlier, that it's hard, that whenever you talk to an audience of adults, there is no way that there's no one in that audience that isn't personally affected. So then we can, I know my tendency is like, oh, just be careful, be careful how we talk about it. But I think I'll say be careful, and then I'll even lead to like, well, then maybe we shouldn't, how careful are we going to be? We can be careful, but still.
Yeah, I think there's a second piece that probably holds back some Christians, and that's because it's unpopular in the culture. Mm-hmm. So lots of Christians are willing to talk about things that the culture seems on board with. So, hey, it's pretty easy, and you hear lots of Christians talking about racial justice, which is an important topic. Mm-hmm. And a lot of Christians will talk about that because you're not going to get as much pushback, if any pushback, on depending on kind of what your view, and if you advocate and say, hey, racial justice is an important issue, and the culture might, at least on that kind of level, is with you. Mm-hmm. And abortion, that's clearly more divisive, mm-hmm. and so that might be some of the reason why as well. And I think those are just good things for us to consider.
Yeah,
to think about what holds us back from speaking on some issues and not speaking on others, and vice versa. So anyway, okay, so let's get to the moral question.
So, if I were going to talk to our kids, yeah.
I think some of my training in this comes from the time I spent at Stand to Reason with Greg Kokel and Scott Klusendorf, very good thinkers on this issue. So they've really mentored me on this. And Scott talks about simplifying the moral logic and simplifying it by helping us to recognize that when it comes to the morality of abortion, there's just one question that we need to answer. And the question is, what is the unborn? And so Scott uses this analogy that I've borrowed from him and used in my talks. But let's say I'm standing at the kitchen sink, and one of the kids comes up behind, and let's say I'm doing some dishes, and a kid comes up behind me and says, "Daddy, can I kill this?" Right? What is the question that I have to answer first before I can answer the question, "Daddy, can I kill this?" Well, I have to ask, what is this? What are you talking about? If I turn around and, let's say Jonah's standing there with a cockroach that he caught in our house, I'm going to say, yeah, kill that. I don't want cockroaches in my house. Get it out of here. Right? If he's sitting there holding one of, the kittens that our cat has just had, "Daddy, can I kill this?" I'm saying, hey, put the kitten down. Your sister is going to be here in a second, and you're going to get pounded if you don't put that kitten down, right? No, if it's a kitten, no. If he's holding, the neighbor kid, "Daddy, can I kill this?" Of course, the answer is no. So what is it? What is the unborn is the primary question. Before you can say, is it right or wrong to kill something, you've got to answer the question, what is it? And so the question is, what is the unborn? Is the unborn a full member of the human family? If the answer to that question is yes, then we would have to say that abortion, elective abortion, meaning the mother's life is not
in jeopardy.
In jeopardy. Okay, like in an ectopic pregnancy or something like that. No, it's an elective abortion. It's for financial reasons. It's for economic reasons. It's for
personal reasons.
Whatever personal reasons there might be. Then if the unborn is a full human being, then abortion is the taking of that life, and it's a serious moral wrong. And so in one sense, it's very simple. And this is the question, a great question to ask your kids. What is the unborn child in the womb? What is the unborn? And we think about the language that we even use, right? Well, we don't say, well, what's the unborn clump of cells in mommy's tummy? Mm-hmm. Say, what's the unborn baby? What's the unborn child? What is it? It's a human being.
Yeah, actually, as we've been listening the past day or so to news, to news cycle things that are being said, and even the president, Joe Biden's statement about it, he actually, I'm assuming it was on accident, but he said aborting the child. And different celebrities who have been tweeting and talking about it. Whoopi Goldberg on The View says abortion is between my doctor, myself, and my child. So I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue, if they actually meant to say that, but you're right. The language, even to talk about it, there is. And I think also too, now with the advancement of science, and like when I got an ultrasound for our oldest daughter, Lexi, when she was 27. It was blurry. This was almost 30 years ago. And they said, well, it looks like it might be a girl, but don't hang wallpaper. And now you can see babies sucking their thumb. You can get these 3D images. So just the advancement that we've made in embryonic science, we can see clearly, oh, it's a little human being. And so I wonder if that's why people, like even people who are for abortion, like the president, slip and say the child, because it's actually, what is the unborn? I think we all know.
Yeah,
it is a child.
So that's the second part of this is, okay, so what's the evidence that the unborn is a human being? And if you want to teach your kids some logic, let's say you got junior hires, right? And you're at that logic stage and you're wanting to teach your junior hires, or I guess middle schoolers, or your high schoolers, or your more advanced elementary kids. You want to teach them the logic of this. It's a simple syllogism. Number one, it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. That's premise number one. It's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise number two.
And do you say to your kids, like, okay, do we agree with that? Or do you even discuss that, or say, okay, this is the premise. Yeah. What do we think about that?
That's a good question. Now that premise typically is not going to be the controversial one, right? No one is really out there arguing, no, it can be morally good to intentionally kill innocent human beings. I haven't heard that position in a while. So that's going to be the non-controversial one. And now that one we can say, well, what does support that? Well, common sense supports that. We have moral common sense. There are certain moral truths that are just self-evident. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. That's self-evident. In fact, I think this is a moral claim that's self-evident, and therefore the burden of proof is not on me to show that that's the case. The burden of proof is on the person who's objecting to it, because that's just moral common sense. It's like if someone comes up to me and goes, "Brad, I don't think you exist." I don't go, "Oh gosh, well, how do I prove it to you? I have like this burden of proof to prove that I exist." No, that's just self-evident. If you want to deny what's self-evident, you've got to give me a good reason why I should accept your claim. So I think that's the case here.
And most children are pretty much aware of this very self-evident thing that, oh, it's wrong to kill someone who's innocent.
Even pro-abortion advocates are going to agree with that one. Here's the premise where you're going to get the pushback, and it's premise number two. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. So premise two is that abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. So what's going to be the argument? Well, it's not. Typically, it's going to be it's not a human being. That's one option. You can say, well, no, I can deny that and say, well, it's not actually a human being. Actually, what most objections to the pro-life view turn out to be is they turn out to be begging the question. And by begging the question, I'm talking about the fallacy where you assume what needs to be proved. It's sometimes we use the phrase begging the question in a way like it's inviting a question. That's not what we're talking about in logic. In fact, you should teach your kids this logical fallacy. Begging the question means you assume what needs to be proven here. What needs to be proven, what needs to be shown is that the unborn is not a human being. Because now, and so that we want to support this premise, right? Premise 2, which let's get to the conclusion first. If premise 1 and premise 2 are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. Therefore, abortion is morally wrong. If it's wrong to intentionally kill human beings, innocent human beings, and abortion intentionally kills innocent human beings, then abortion is morally wrong. That's the simple logic of it. Mm-hmm. And so we want to help our kids really develop strong convictions that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Now, why would we want to give them strong logic on this? Well, of course, to engage with the culture and to engage with people on this, so that they can reason intelligently and they can, they can make a case for the pro-life view, that they could even persuade other people not to have abortions. We know of people who have convinced others not to have an abortion because they've been able to reason logically with them, because we are rational creatures. We're made in God's image. We have a rational mind, whether we acknowledge him or not. And so there can be appeals to reason that are convincing. And so you can this kind of moral reasoning can actually save a life. But then here's another reason why we want to teach our kids this, is that we want them to be convinced so they never make this horrible choice. We want them to have strong convictions so that even if they get themselves in a difficult situation where there is a unexpected pregnancy, right? Maybe it's one of our kids is single and ends up sleeping with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and there's a pregnancy. Well, hopefully their convictions in that situation run so deep and they understand the logic of the pro-life position that abortion's not even an option on the table, right? Mm-hmm. So ideas have consequences, and this is why we need to really make a strong case. Now, on supporting that second premise, you mentioned it already, Erin, we have science on our side. Mm-hmm. The science of embryology makes it clear. This is a living, a distinct organism from the mom, has its own DNA, eventually is going to have its own heartbeat, right? This is not the woman's body. Mm-hmm. This is a child with a separate body. Mm-hmm. And so embryology makes this clear. Philosophy makes this clear. In fact, Scott Klusendorf, who he mentioned, talks about the SLED test. The SLED test is just looking at what are the distinctions between a born human being like you or me, or even the toddler, right, or whoever. What's the distinction between the born human being and the unborn human being? Well, there's four major distinctions. SLED: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. That's called the SLED test. Those are four things that are distinct between the unborn and the born child. And the question is, do any of those differences, are they morally relevant? Meaning, if it's true that this difference is really a difference, does it mean then it provides some kind of justification for now taking the life of the unborn? And in all four of those cases, we'd say no. Size doesn't matter. Size does not determine your value as a person. Otherwise, we'd have to look at bigger human beings and say they're somehow more valuable, right?
Well, if you're in a family, your kids, you look around and say, dad's the biggest in the family. Does that mean dad's more valuable than little one in the high chair? Same with degree of dependency. Little one in the high chair, we have to feed them, give them bath, put them to bed. Daddy's not as dependent. He can do his own thing, and so hopefully
daddy's not as dependent. He can take care of his own laundry.
Okay, well, maybe mommy.
Feed himself.
Mommy is completely no. So you just within your own family, you can make distinctions that we all have weaknesses and things, but does this change our value? Yeah. Of course not.
I think that's great. That because you're making it, you're bringing it home. Mm-hmm. literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
But you're pointing to the people in the house, and that's how that's a great way to give a young kid some visuals.
Yeah.
Degree of you said degree of dependency, level of development. Right? If I'm less developed, a 2-year-old girl is less developed than a 20-year-old girl, doesn't have a reproductive system all in place yet. Does that mean she's less valuable? Of course not. You could point out, those differences.
Yeah.
Environment, what the location that you're in, does that change your value, right? In the womb, outside of the womb? Of course not. I mean, how would a trip down a 10-inch, birth canal change the value of anybody? Giving those kind of examples can really help, I think, kids.
Yes,
understand.
and living in a family, if you have more than one kid, then they've most likely experienced mom being pregnant, or even if they have an auntie's pregnant, someone in church is pregnant. So you can use these real life examples of and this, like you said, so much of this is self-evident to children, and just pointing it out to them, and they notice, and then they're like, oh yes, of course, that makes complete sense. So before we move on to some other ways or other areas of the abortion question to talk about, I think probably some people are listening going, okay, so you make this moral argument, but at what age do we talk about abortion? So this story hits about the Supreme Court, or just any time that it comes up, maybe in conversation with older people around the table or whatever. When do we start even talking to our kids about abortion? Because like the moral argument you laid out, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. When do we define abortion for kids, and at what level? And that's where, I think, people listening who have a 5, 6, 7-year-old, it's obviously a different conversation than if you have middle school and high school kids. You're saying a lot more. But just even thinking about how we've done it over the years with our kids that are younger, but we've had to explain what abortion is. Yeah,
I think we have talked about what an abortion is to our kids at pretty young ages. I mean, definitely early elementary.
5, 6 years old. Yeah.
And just helping them understand what's abortion. It's when a doctor goes into mommy's belly and will kill the baby before it's born, right? I mean, that's a simple description of it. And of course, that's horrifying to a little kid. And I think what our kind of view on that has been, hey, there are real moral evils that our kids need to be aware of. My take on this one is that this is the greatest moral evil in our country right now. I mean, if we're right on this, we have killed 60 million unborn children. I mean, that is unfathomable. And so we want our kids to be a little bit sober about this, and because we want them ultimately to advocate for the vulnerable. The most vulnerable citizens in our country are the unborn. Yeah. So I think all of that to say we're okay with talking about what abortion is. Now, we don't get into the graphic, parts of it at those younger ages.
Yeah, at that age. And I'm thinking too, I know when we've had conversations with our kids, the little ones that's when they kill the baby that's inside the mommy. The first question has almost always been, why would they do that? Yeah. And so that leads to the harder part of the conversation. But I think, the way we've handled it is just, I've said to the kids, well, mommies are lied to and told that, first of all, sometimes they're told it's not really a baby. And so they're lied to about that. Sometimes mommies are lied to and they're told, if you have this baby's going to ruin your life. And of course, we know babies don't ruin your life. They make your life full of joy and so much better. So, but basically moms are lied to, and a lot of them don't even understand what they're doing when they do it, because that, is a lot of stories of women. So even within explaining it, you're explaining the reality that a lot of people have been deceived in this. And so even just simple explanations like that, I think you can do that. Of course, you're the parent of your child, what they can handle, but to a 5, 6, 7-year-old, to explain what it is, to explain that this is legal in our country, that we live in a country that pays for women to have this procedure done, that you and I live in a state that pays for women to have abortion. So it's good for our kids to know. And it's okay that it's upsetting to them. That's okay, because it should be upsetting to them. I'm actually thinking about, Lila Rose, who started the organization Live Action. I read her book this year, and actually got to interview her for the Strong Women podcast that I do with my friend Sarah. But part of her story here, she's now a pro-life advocate and does so much good work in defending the unborn. But she was, I think, it was either 8 or 9 years old, and she found a book on her parents' bookshelf about abortion. And it actually had pictures in there of aborted fetuses. And she is now an older woman. She has kids of her own. She still remembers that. And it didn't traumatize her in a way that as parents we would probably, her mom wasn't showing her the book, so her mom probably didn't think it would be something good for her to see, but she saw it, and she talks about how for her the horror of it was so evident. And then she asked her mom, what is this? And her mom said, oh, this is abortion. And then that lit a spark in her. She knew it was wrong, and she wanted to defend these little babies, and she wanted to help women who believed that what they were doing was just a lump of cells or whatever. So I think this is an area we don't want to protect our kids from in the overprotecting sense of like, oh, they shouldn't know about this bad stuff happening. I think at a certain level they can understand it and grieve with us about it.
Yeah, and this fits into the larger biblical worldview, right? So we're, in one sense, when we talk about teaching our kids about abortion, it actually starts before you get to the issue of abortion. There's this larger biblical worldview, this larger biblical story that we're a part of, and that story has creation, right? Our origin story. And God makes everything good. And then like any good story, there's conflict. You go from Genesis 1 to Genesis 3, and sin enters the world and breaks the world. And there is great evil in this world. And we don't want to keep our kids from that truth. We want them to know there is great evil out there, and that evil is something that we fight. Right? And we go out and we fight that evil. We fight injustice, and we have courage even when there are forces against us, right? And there's this battle to join. And I know that a lot of Christians maybe get uncomfortable with that battle language. That's the language of Scripture. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Verses 3 through 5. That's Paul's saying we are in a war. Now, our warfare is different than the warfare of the world, but we demolish arguments, right? We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We, demolish the arguments or the knowledge that's been raised up against the knowledge of God. So this fits the biblical view. There's great evil out there, and then also, I think just thinking about our creation story, our origin story. Well, God made man in his image, and he made them male and female. And then what's the first commandment that he gives? Be fruitful and multiply. So that biblical story right there sets the table. And so teaching that from a very young age and being explicit, say God made us. If we're talking to younger kids, God made us, and he made us male and female. And mommies and daddies can come together and have children. And it's this beautiful, wonderful design of God. And so when you see a pregnant mommy, what's inside of her, right? It's a child. It's a baby. Okay, well, what makes that baby valuable? It's made in the image of God, and we can have those conversations that really lay some of that framework that's needed. So then we talk about abortion. There's already some foundation there for our kids. So and this is kind of the approach with every issue. Sometimes we just deal with the issue, and we haven't given that larger worldview. And so we want to make sure that larger worldview is in place. So you might not be talking to your 5-year-old about abortion, but you certainly should be talking to your 5-year-old about God's design for families and what it means to be human, and that human beings are made in God's image. And because we're made in God's image, every human being is valuable. And so you can lay that foundation there.
Yeah, and then as they grow, you're continuing their education on what abortion is. And I think that's something that we need to, as parents, as maybe again, as uncomfortable as that is, to really educate our kids on what abortion does to the unborn. And that's where Live Action is a great resource on their website. We'll link to it in the show notes. They have several videos that are stories of people, children who have grown up now, but they were aborted but survived. They have all kinds of stories on there that are good for us to hear. But they also have videos where a doctor who's performed over 1,000 abortions describes what abortion does.
Yeah, he's a former abortion doctor, gynecologist. And he describes in detail different kinds of abortions in the first trimester, the second trimester, even the third trimester. And I think for older kids, for our
junior high, high school, for sure,
our teenagers for sure need to see those things. And they have diagrams, so it's it's graphic in that sense that it shows kind of what the procedure looks like, but it's sobering. This is actually what's going on. And sometimes those visuals are so good in pricking the conscience. Like, I don't think we should stay away from it because it's graphic or it's hard to watch or those kind of things. Sometimes we need that because we probably don't care enough about this issue.
Yeah, we can't just stay in the theoretical. And I think when we are teaching about abortion, we need to teach our older kids exactly what it is. And they need to know what it is. And again, not shield them from that, especially when you think about the average junior high and high schooler is watching movies, playing video games where people are getting shot, dying,
blown to pieces,
all this stuff. It reminds me of our podcast on taking them to funerals and talking about death. I mean, how many movies and video games do they see people dying and they just fade off the screen and there's no. So this again is helping them to see the reality of what abortion is and not letting it stay in the theoretical.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point, and I guess I want to be a little more confrontive with parents on that. Like, what do you let your kids watch on Netflix? What video games do you let them play? What movies are they watching? And what kind of violence are you allowing them to be exposed to? And then when it comes to the issue of abortion, we would say, no, let's...
I don't want to let a doctor describe the procedure and show the tools that they use.
And this issue is so much more, so much more morally significant. So I don't think that's a good excuse. One of the other videos that they have on Lila Rose's on Live Action, their YouTube channel, is they go up to pro-abortion advocates and ask them, hey, what are their views? They affirm that, they're for abortion. And then they show them the doctor describing what abortion is. and people will change their minds.
Yes.
So it's effective to see the visuals and to really know what's going on. And like you said, it keeps it from simply being an argument, a hypothetical and abstract.
It reveals that these people say, oh yeah, I'm for a woman's right to choose, or whatever slogan they're using. And then they just show them, this is what you're saying you're for. And then they're horrified because they don't even realize what they're saying, what they're advocating for. So yeah, I think this is something we ought to do with our kids and really let them see what we're talking about.
Yeah, if you want to be equipped, of course, I mean, we've already talked about Live Action's YouTube channel. It's a great place to go.
Yeah.
Our good friend Scott Klusendorf, he's the president of Life Training Institute. Their website is prolifetraining.com. And Scott has written a really good book. It's thorough and it's readable. It's accessible. It's called The Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture. And so there's that. There's other resources out there. Stand to Reason, my old organization that I was a part of for 14 years, fantastic resources and articles on the pro-life issue. You can go to str.org. There are a ton of good resources to equip us with the truth on this issue. So plenty of resources out there, and all of this is consistent with a biblical view. Like what we're talking about is kind of moral reasoning, and it's, you might say, well, you didn't quote any Bible verses necessarily on this. That's okay. Because what we're doing is what Paul talks about in Romans 2, right? Where we're appealing to the law written on every human heart. In Romans 2, 14 and 15, he talks about this. God's moral law is written on our human hearts. And so we can appeal to the natural world. We can make natural law arguments that help us to see that moral truth actually is consistent with biblical truth. And the biblical truth that we would point to, that murder is wrong, right? We look at maybe the 10 Commandments and other places in Scripture where it's clear, killing innocent people for no good reason is wrong. That's clear biblical truth. The psalmist talks about knowing us in our mother's womb, right? There's implications there. Well, the biblical truth is consistent with the moral truth that we discover in the world. And so this, in terms of engaging the world and helping our kids engage the world, we can give them good, some people might call secular arguments. That just means we're not reasoning from the scriptures, we're reasoning from the world around us. I'd rather say natural law arguments from the natural order of things. All that to say is that the moral truth we discover in the world is consistent with the biblical truth, the truths that we discover in Scripture, because biblical truth gives us knowledge of reality. And so these go hand in hand. And so our moral reasoning just confirms what Scripture says.
Okay, so we have some more things we actually wanted to cover on this topic of talking to your kids about abortion. And we wanted to do some objections. So objections in the culture, and then how to talk your kids through those. So we'll save that for the next podcast. And next one, we'll continue on this topic of abortion, but how to walk our kids through arguments that they might get in the culture, and bring them up to your kids, and then how to talk through it with them. So we'll do that next time.
MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.